The voice came first. Low, sharp, unapologetic. "Sir, you need to step out of that seat, right now." The words cut through the cabin of the early morning flight from Chicago to Washington like a snapped cable. Conversations died mid-sentence. A coffee cup froze halfway to someone's lips. The soft hum of the engines suddenly felt too loud, like the plane itself was listening. Arthur Coleman did not look up immediately. He sat in the aisle-side seat of first class, shoulders relaxed, hands resting loosely on the armrests. 62 years old, gray threaded carefully through his close-cropped hair. A navy jacket worn thin at the cuffs. No logo, no flash. The kind of clothes a man chose when he had stopped needing to prove anything. The man standing over him was doing the opposite. White, mid-60s, tall, broad in the chest. A cashmere coat folded neatly over his arm. A gold watch catching the overhead light every time he moved his wrist. His jaw was tight, lips pressed into a line that suggested he was used to being obeyed long before he finished speaking. "I've been flying this route for 20 years, the man continued, louder now. "That seat is mine." Arthur finally lifted his eyes. They were calm, steady, dark. Not confused, not frightened, just observant, like a man taking inventory of a room he'd walked into many times before. "This is my assigned seat," Arthur said. His voice was even. No tremor, no challenge, just a statement of fact. A few rows away, someone shifted uncomfortably. Leather creaked. A phone vibrated, then was silenced too quickly. The man scoffed. A short, humorless sound. "That's funny." Behind him, the aisle narrowed as a flight attendant approached, tablet tucked against her chest. Melissa Grant moved with practiced efficiency, but her eyes flicked between the two men faster than she intended. 45. Hair pulled tight into a regulation bun, smile ready but not quite landing. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," the white man said, pointing at Arthur without looking at him. "He's in my seat." Melissa glanced down at her tablet. Her finger paused, just for a fraction of a second, long enough to see the name, long enough to see the seat number, long enough to know, without question, that Arthur Coleman was exactly where he was supposed to be. She looked back up. Her smile tightened. "Mr. Coleman," she said, lowering her voice the way people do when they want compliance without a scene. "Would you mind stepping into premium cabin for the moment, just while we sort this out?" Sort this out. The phrase landed heavy. It always did. Arthur studied her face, the faint crease between her brows, the way her fingers pressed too firmly into the edge of the tablet. He saw it immediately. Not malice, not cruelty. Fear. The quiet, professional fear of someone who had learned which problems followed you home and which ones got written up. "Is there something wrong with my ticket?" Arthur asked. "No," Melissa said too quickly. "Not at all. It's just, this gentleman is a long-time priority customer. We're trying to avoid delays." Behind them, the man smiled. Just slightly. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. Arthur exhaled through his nose. Slow, controlled. A breath he had learned decades ago. "Who made the decision?" he asked. Melissa blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Who decided that my seat was negotiable?" Arthur said, still calm, still quiet. But now the air around the words felt denser. "I'd like a name." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone in the window seat across the aisle shifted their gaze, then looked down at their newspaper. Another passenger pretended to scroll through emails, thumb shaking just enough to notice. Melissa hesitated. In that pause lived 1,000 things she didn't say. Performance reviews, complaint logs, the memory of a colleague called into an office and never scheduled again. She had learned, over 8 years, how to keep flights smooth, how to keep metrics clean, how to choose the path that made problems disappear instead of explode. "I'm handling it," she said finally. Arthur nodded. Once. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and removed his boarding pass. He held it up between them. The paper was creased at the edges, used, real. Seat 1C, first class. He didn't push it toward her. He didn't wave it. He simply held it there, letting the truth sit in the space between them. Melissa swallowed. The white man sighed loudly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Every time they sell these seats to the wrong people, it's chaos." That did it. Not for Arthur, for someone else. 2 rows back, a woman in her late 60s stiffened. She had silver hair cut short and wore a denim jacket with a faded pin from a march that happened before most people on the plane were born. Her hand tightened around her phone. She didn't raise it yet, just angled it slightly. Enough. Next to her, an older man with a veteran's cap shifted in his seat. His jaw clenched. He said nothing. Not yet. Arthur felt the weight of the room, the watching, the not watching, the familiar silence of people deciding whether this was their moment or not. He folded the boarding pass and slid it back into his pocket. "Thank you," he said to Melissa. She frowned. "Sir?" "I'll move," Arthur said. The man exhaled in triumph. Finally. Arthur stood. The aisle felt narrower now, every step deliberate. He reached up, retrieved his carry-on, the wheels clicking softly against the overhead bin. No rush, no drama. The quiet dignity of a man who refused to be hurried out of his own life. As he passed Melissa, he paused. "This isn't about convenience," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "It's about what you decided was acceptable." Her eyes flickered. Guilt, fear, something else she didn't have a name for yet. Arthur walked toward the back of the plane. Each row felt like a small descent. The seats narrower, the light harsher, the air just a little thinner. He sat down, placed the bag at his feet, folded his hands in his lap. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man glanced at him, then away. Ashamed, relieved it wasn't him. Arthur closed his eyes, not in defeat, in memory. He saw his father's hands on a steering wheel that didn't belong to him, heard a conductor's voice telling them where they didn't belong, felt the weight of being asked to step aside so someone else could be comfortable. His phone vibrated. He opened his eyes and looked at the screen. Susan Miller. He didn't answer right away. Outside the window, the sky was just beginning to lighten, pale, uncertain. The kind of morning that pretended everything was ordinary. Arthur answered. "Susan," he said. "Are you on the plane?" she asked. "Yes." A pause. "Everything okay?" Arthur looked toward the front of the cabin, toward first class, toward the seat that had never really been about him. "No," he said. "But it's clear now. Clear enough to make a call that would cost an airline $500 million. The seatbelt sign chimed, a soft electronic note that felt out of place against the tension thickening inside the cabin. Melissa Grant stood frozen at the galley entrance, fingers resting on the metal edge of the service cart. She could still feel the weight of Arthur Coleman's gaze on her back, calm and unblinking, like a mirror she hadn't meant to look into. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed the front of her uniform, and forced her face back into its professional shape. Smile, breathe, move on. That was the rule, always move on. Up front, the man reclaimed the first-class seat with exaggerated care, lowering himself into the leather as if it had been waiting for him all along. He adjusted the armrests, set his phone on the tray table, and glanced around with the satisfied look of someone whose version of the world had just been confirmed. A champagne flute appeared in his hand moments later. "Much better," he said loudly, raising the glass toward no one in particular. Order restored. A few people laughed, not because it was funny, because laughter was easier than confrontation. Melissa walked down the aisle, distributing drinks, nodding, thanking, apologizing for things no one had complained about. Her movements were automatic now. Years of training carried her forward while her thoughts lagged behind, stuck on a man sitting several rows back, hands folded, eyes forward, saying nothing. In premium cabin, Arthur sat motionless. The seat was narrower, the fabric frayed along the armrest. The overhead bin above him rattled every time the plane shifted slightly in the air. He felt each vibration through the soles of his shoes. He welcomed it. Physical sensations kept memories from getting too loud. Across the aisle, a woman in her early 70s pretended to read a paperback she hadn't turned the page of in 5 minutes. Her fingers tightened around the spine every time someone in first class laughed. She kept glancing toward Arthur, then away, like she wanted to say something but didn't trust her voice not to shake. 2 rows behind him, the veteran leaned forward, elbows on his knees, cap pulled low. His jaw worked as if chewing on words that refused to go down. Arthur felt them, their discomfort, their hesitation. He knew it well. He had lived most of his life inside rooms like this, where injustice hovered just below the surface, polite enough to pretend it wasn't there. His phone vibrated again. Susan Miller. This time, he answered.
"I need you to listen," Arthur said quietly, keeping his voice low. "Not respond. Just listen." There was a pause on the other end. "All right, document everything," he said. "Names, times, decisions. Not just what happened, how it happened." Susan exhaled. "Arthur, what's going on?" "Cultural failure," he said. "The kind that doesn't show up in reports." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you want me to escalate?" she asked. "Not yet," Arthur said. "I want to see what they do next." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. In first class, Melissa knelt beside the service cart, refilling ice. Her hands were shaking now. She noticed and stilled them with effort. 8 years. 8 years of spotless evaluations. 8 years of knowing exactly which passengers mattered and which ones were expected to understand. She had never liked that part of the job. She had simply learned to survive it. The woman with the silver hair finally raised her phone. Not high, not obvious, just enough. Her thumb hovered over the screen as she whispered, barely audible, "I'm recording this." The veteran heard her. He nodded once, a small, firm movement. Permission. The man in first class leaned back, scrolling through his phone. He snapped a photo of the champagne flute against the cabin window, posted it, smiled. "Service still knows how to treat people who belong," he said to the man beside him. Melissa heard it. So did the others. Her stomach twisted. She glanced toward the cockpit door, considered it, dismissed it. "You don't call the captain for this," she told herself. "You don't escalate over a seating issue. You don't make waves when the metrics are clean." But the words from earlier echoed anyway. Who decided that my seat was negotiable? She had, and she knew it. In premium cabin, Arthur stared straight ahead. His reflection stared back at him in the darkened window. He looked older like this. The light caught every line on his face, every year he had earned the hard way. He thought of his father's hands again, the way they had tightened, then relaxed, when the world reminded them of their place. The woman across the aisle finally spoke.
"I'm sorry," she said softly.
Arthur turned toward her. "For what?" he asked.
"For not saying something sooner," she said.
Her eyes were wet but steady.
"I thought we were past this."
Arthur gave a small nod. "So did I." She swallowed.
"My name's Eleanor, Arthur," he said.
She gestured toward the front.
"You want me to say something?"
Arthur considered it, really considered it. He imagined the scene, the raised voices, the defensiveness, the way the story would shift from what was done to how it was handled. "Not yet," he said, "but thank you for asking." She leaned back, disappointed but understanding. A chime sounded from the cockpit. Melissa's phone buzzed in her pocket. Internal message. She stepped into the galley and checked it. Passenger manifest update. She frowned and opened the file. Scrolled. Her breath caught. Arthur Coleman. The name pulsed on the screen like a warning light. She tapped it, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing. The slow onboard connection loaded just enough. Board affiliations, holdings, a partial bio. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from operations. "Captain requests you forward immediately." Her heart slammed against her ribs. In first class, the man drained his champagne and set the glass down with a satisfied clink. "Smooth flight," he said, "just the way it should be." The veteran stood. He didn't shout, didn't grandstand. "This isn't right," he said, voice firm, carrying just far enough. "And you know it." The man laughed. "Sit down." "No," the veteran said. "I've been sitting down my whole life." Phones rose. Not all of them, but enough. Melissa emerged from the galley, face pale now, eyes searching the cabin until they found Arthur. For the first time since the flight began, she looked afraid. Arthur met her gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't look angry. He simply waited. And somewhere between Chicago and Washington, at cruising altitude, the quiet agreement that had governed that cabin for decades began to fracture. Hairline cracks spreading through something that had always pretended to be solid. The plane flew on, but the direction of the story had already changed. The cockpit door closed with a muted click that sounded louder than it should have. Captain Daniel Reeves stood at the instrument panel, hands braced on either side, staring at the passenger manifest glowing on the screen. He was 57, former Air Force, 2 decades flying commercial routes up and down the East Coast. He had seen turbulence, mechanical failures, medical emergencies. He had never seen a name land in his cockpit like a dropped weight. Arthur Coleman. The same Arthur Coleman whose interview he'd read 3 weeks earlier in a trade journal he barely skimmed between flights. Infrastructure, transportation reform, accountability. The kind of man who spoke slowly and meant every word. Reeves rubbed his face once hard. "This can't be right," the first officer said quietly. "It is," Reeves replied. "And it's bad." In the galley outside, Melissa Grant paced 3 steps and stopped. 3 steps and stopped again. Her phone buzzed in her hand with messages she was too afraid to open. Her mouth felt dry. Her pulse thudded in her ears. 8 years, she thought. 8 years reduced to a single decision made in under 30 seconds. She replayed it again and again. The look on Arthur's face. The calm. The question she hadn't wanted to answer. Who decided? She had. Reeves opened the door. "Melissa," he said. She straightened instantly. "Captain." "Bring the manifest and close the curtain." She did. Her hands shook as she passed him the tablet. "You moved, Mr. Coleman," Reeves said. Not a question. "Yes, sir," she said, to avoid a confrontation. Reeves's jaw tightened. "You created one." She swallowed. "The other passenger is diamond priority. He had no claim to that seat," Reeves cut in, "and you know it." Silence filled the galley. The engines hummed. Somewhere behind the curtain, someone laughed too loudly. Reeves lowered his voice. "Do you understand who that man is?" Melissa nodded, eyes shining now. "I didn't know at the time. That's not the point," Reeves said. "And if you think it is, then we have a bigger problem than a seating dispute." Her shoulders slumped. "What do you want me to do?" Reeves looked past her through the narrow aisle toward premium cabin, toward Arthur Coleman sitting quietly, hands folded, as if waiting for a verdict. "Nothing," Reeves said. "Not yet." He turned back toward the cockpit. "I'm making a call." In the cabin, the tension had shifted. It was no longer contained. It buzzed. People whispered. Phones stayed half-raised now, no longer hiding. Eleanor sat upright, eyes fixed forward. The veteran stood in the aisle, arms crossed, daring someone to challenge him. Arthur felt it all without turning his head. He checked his watch. Not out of impatience, out of habit. Time mattered. Always had. His phone vibrated. Susan again. This time he answered immediately. "They know," she said. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. "How badly?" "Enough that the board is already asking questions," Susan said. "And Arthur, the market's sensitive right now. This could go fast." Arthur opened his eyes. Through the partition he could see the edge of first class, the seat, the man occupying it like a trophy. "It already has," he said. In first class, the man finally noticed the shift, the whispers, the phones, the veteran still standing. "What's with the attitude?" he demanded. "This is a plane, not a protest." The veteran met his gaze. "You don't get to decide that." The man scoffed. "Sit down before you get yourself thrown off." "Funny," the veteran said. "That's exactly what you thought you could do to someone else." A murmur spread. Not agreement, not yet. Recognition. Melissa returned to the aisle. Her face had changed. No smile now. No practiced ease. Just resolve mixed with fear. "Sir," she said to the man in first class, "please lower your voice." He stared at her. "Are you kidding me?" "I'm asking you," she said, firmer now, "to lower your voice." Arthur watched her, really watched her. He saw the effort it took, the way her shoulders squared despite the tremor in her hands. Growth, he thought, was never graceful. The man leaned back, incredulous. Unbelievable. Melissa turned toward Arthur. "Mr. Coleman," she said. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. "The captain would like to speak with you." The cabin went still. Every head turned. Arthur rose slowly. The veteran stepped aside without being asked. Eleanor clasped her hands together, breath held. Arthur nodded once. Of course. As he walked forward, the man in first class stared at him, confusion flickering across his face for the first time. "What's this about?" he asked. Arthur stopped beside him. "For you?" Arthur said quietly. "Nothing at all." He continued into the cockpit. Reeves stood as Arthur entered. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "I owe you an apology." Arthur met his gaze. "For what?" "For allowing this to happen," Reeves said, "and for not intervening sooner." Arthur studied him, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his stance. A man accustomed to command, realizing he had hesitated when it mattered. "Thank you," Arthur said. "That matters more than you think." Reeves exhaled. "We're prepared to offer you your seat back. Immediately." Arthur shook his head. "That's not why I'm here." Reeves nodded. "I suspected as much." Arthur placed his phone on the console between them. The screen lit up with a single message. Draft. Unsaved. Susan Miller. "Captain," Arthur said, voice steady, "this flight is just a symptom. What happens next is the diagnosis." Reeves looked at the phone, then back at Arthur. "You're serious?" "I always am." Outside the cockpit, Melissa waited, heart pounding, knowing that whatever was decided in that small room would not stay there. In first class, the man shifted in his seat, uneasy now. For the first time, he felt it, the sense that something had moved beyond him, beyond his voice, beyond his certainty. The plane flew on, steady and level, but somewhere above the clouds, a line had been crossed. And once crossed, it could not be uncrossed. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the kind of adjustment meant to soothe, but it had the opposite effect. Shadows sharpened. Faces grew harder to read. Arthur Coleman remained standing near the cockpit door as Captain Reeves returned to his seat. The apologies still lingered in the air, but Arthur knew better than to confuse words with repair. Apologies were easy at altitude. Consequences came later. He turned back toward the cabin. Every eye tracked him now. Not openly, not boldly, but enough to feel. He walked down the aisle with the same measured pace, the same quiet gravity, as if the narrow corridor belonged to him now. Not because of authority, because of attention. The man in first class followed him with his eyes, unease creeping into his expression like a draft through a closed window. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. The gold watch caught the light again, but this time it looked gaudy, defensive. Melissa Grant stood frozen near the galley, watching Arthur return to premium cabin. Her mind raced ahead of her body, trying to calculate outcomes she had never prepared for. Suspension, investigation, a call from human resources that would begin politely and end permanently. She had spent years believing that staying neutral kept her safe. Now she saw the lie in it. Arthur sat back down, folded his hands, waited. The veteran lowered himself into his seat but did not relax. Eleanor's phone remained angled, recording not the spectacle, but the silence. The kind of silence that precedes a reckoning. In first class, the man finally leaned toward Melissa as she passed. "What's going on?" he whispered sharply. "Why is everyone staring?" Melissa stopped, slowly turned to face him. "We're handling it," she said. "That's what you said before," he snapped. Her jaw tightened. "Please enjoy the rest of your flight, sir." He scoffed. "I'm not the problem here." She met his gaze, held it. For the first time, she didn't look away. Behind her, the curtains separating cabins fluttered slightly as the plane adjusted course. Outside, the sky had darkened into a deep slate blue, clouds layered like folded steel. Arthur's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Susan. Unknown number. He stared at it for a long second, then answered. "Arthur Coleman," he said. A voice on the other end, controlled, polished, the kind of voice that had learned to sound calm under pressure. "Mr. Coleman, this is Thomas Whitaker, Senior Vice President of Operations." Arthur closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, in acknowledgement. "Yes," Arthur said. "I assumed you'd call." There was a pause. "I understand there was an incident on your flight." Arthur looked around the cabin, at the people pretending not to listen, at the ones who weren't pretending anymore. "Incident is an interesting word," he said.
Whitaker cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer compensation, immediate upgrades, a formal apology." Arthur's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "You're offering solutions to a problem you haven't named." Another pause, longer this time. "We regret any discomfort you experienced," Whitaker said carefully. Arthur opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on the worn fabric of the seat in front of him, on the frayed edge where countless hands had rested without complaint. "This isn't about discomfort," Arthur said. "It's about judgment. Yours, and the culture that trained it." In first class, the man leaned back, trying to appear relaxed. His knee bounced. He noticed it and stilled it with effort. Whitaker's voice softened. "Arthur, we value our relationship with you, with your firm. We don't want this to escalate." Arthur almost smiled. Almost. "It already has," he said. He ended the call. Eleanor let out a breath. "I made the decision to move you. Not because you were wrong, because it was easier." Arthur studied her face, the strain, the honesty breaking through at last. "Easier for whom?" he asked. "For me," she said, her voice cracked. "For the airline. For everyone except you." Arthur nodded. "That's usually how it works." She hesitated. "I didn't think about what it would cost." Arthur glanced toward first class, toward the man who had demanded space without consequence. "Most people don't." In first class, the man finally stood. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "I didn't do anything illegal." The veteran turned in his seat. "You didn't have to." The man bristled. "Excuse me?" "You knew exactly what you were doing," the veteran said. "You just didn't think it would matter." The cabin stirred. Not applause, not outrage. Something quieter. Agreement. The man's face flushed. "I paid for my status." Arthur rose again. The movement alone silenced the cabin. He stepped into the aisle and faced the man, just a few feet between them now. No shouting, no threat, just presence. "You paid for a ticket," Arthur said. "Nothing more." The man laughed nervously. "You think you're better than me?" Arthur shook his head. "No, I think you're used to thinking you are." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Eleanor lowered her phone slightly, eyes shining. Melissa watched from a few steps back, heart pounding, realizing this was no longer about seats or policies. It was about exposure. The man opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Something in Arthur's expression gave him pause. Not anger. Certainty. Arthur turned away from him. He walked back to his seat, picked up his phone, and typed a single line. "Susan, proceed." He did not look up as he sent it. In the cockpit, Captain Reeves felt his phone vibrate. He glanced at the message preview and swore softly under his breath. In a corporate office miles away, screens would light up. Calendars would be cleared. A deal months in the making would begin to unravel thread by thread. But inside the cabin, none of that had happened yet. All that existed was the silence after truth is spoken. The kind that cannot be smoothed over with service smiles or loyalty points. The plane flew on, steady and level, and every person aboard felt it now. Something had shifted. Not loudly. Irrevocably. The first thing that broke was not the silence. It was the illusion. Arthur Coleman sat back down, the seat pressing against his shoulders in a way that reminded him this cabin was never designed for comfort, only compliance. Across the aisle, Eleanor lowered her phone completely now. She didn't need to record anymore. What mattered had already happened. What came next would not fit neatly into a frame. In first class, the man stood rigid, hands clenched at his sides.
The confidence that had carried him through the boarding door had thinned into something brittle. He looked around, searching for allies, for the quiet nods he was used to receiving. He found none. Melissa Grant felt a strange, unwelcome clarity settle in her chest. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer about losing her job. It was about realizing she had already lost something else, long before this flight. She had traded judgment for convenience, dignity for metrics, and it had cost her more than she knew. Her earpiece crackled. "Melissa," Captain Reeves said, low and urgent. "I need you up front." She hesitated, then nodded and moved toward the cockpit. Each step felt like crossing a line she couldn't step back over. Inside, Reeves didn't waste time. "We have a problem," he said. Melissa gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yes, sir, I noticed." "This just came in," Reeves said, turning the screen toward her. The headline was already forming. Not public yet, but unmistakable. "Nova Meridian suspends transportation acquisition pending review." Melissa's breath caught. "That's his company," she whispered. Reeves nodded. "Arthur Coleman doesn't make calls lightly." She leaned against the wall, suddenly unsteady. What happens now? Reeves looked out through the windshield at the endless stretch of sky. "Now," he said, "we deal with consequences." Back in the cabin, the veteran finally sat down fully. His hands rested on his thighs, steady now. He had said what needed saying. Eleanor reached over and squeezed his arm. He nodded once, grateful, but still troubled. Arthur watched none of it. He was somewhere else. He thought of boardrooms filled with men who spoke of efficiency while ignoring impact, of contracts signed with a smile that hid compromise, of how many times he had told himself change came slowly, incrementally, politely. His phone buzzed again. Susan Miller. This time he read without answering. "Press is circling. The airline is requesting an emergency call. Do you want to speak to them, or let the silence do the work?" Arthur typed back with deliberate calm. "Let them wait." He placed the phone face down on the tray table. In first class, the man finally sat, hard. He stared straight ahead now, jaw tight, eyes unfocused. The gold watch felt heavy on his wrist. He tugged his sleeve down, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. He had lived his life believing power was something you carried visibly. He had never considered what happened when someone carried it quietly. A flight attendant approached him, younger than Melissa, eyes wide, movements careful. "Sir," she said, "would you like anything else?" He shook his head sharply. "No." She hesitated. "If there's anything—" I said no. She retreated quickly. Melissa returned from the cockpit, face pale but composed. She moved down the aisle, stopping beside Arthur's seat. Her voice was steady now, but softer than before. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "the airline would like to speak with you when we land." Arthur looked up. His gaze held no satisfaction, no triumph. "Of course they do," he said. She swallowed. "I want you to know, I understand now." Arthur considered her words, weighed them. "Understanding is a beginning," he said, "not a resolution." She nodded. "I know." A few rows back, Eleanor leaned forward. "You okay?" she asked Arthur quietly. He met her eyes and offered the smallest smile. "I will be." She nodded, accepting that. The cabin settled into an uneasy quiet. The engines droned. The seatbelt sign remained lit. Outside, clouds rolled past, indifferent. Somewhere between altitudes, phones across the country began to light up. Not with outrage yet, with questions. Analysts, journalists, lawyers.
People who understood the significance of a deal paused, of a silence held. Arthur felt none of that yet. He stayed present. He had learned long ago that moments like this were rare, and rushing them only dulled their edge. The man in first class shifted again, finally turning toward Arthur. His voice was lower now, less certain. "Look," he said, "this has gotten out of hand." Arthur did not turn around. "I didn't mean anything by it," the man continued. "It was just, I'm used to certain standards." Arthur faced him slowly. "Standards without principle are just preferences," he said. The man scoffed weakly. "You're going to ruin an airline over this?" Arthur's eyes were steady. "No," he said. "They're going to reveal themselves." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. The man looked away. Melissa watched the exchange, a knot tightening in her chest. She knew then that no apology she offered would erase what she had chosen. She also knew something else, that this moment would follow her for the rest of her career, wherever it led. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reeves said, measured and controlled. "We'll be beginning our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." A routine announcement. Nothing more. And yet, it felt like a marker. Arthur leaned back, closed his eyes briefly, and allowed himself one quiet thought. Not of victory, not of justice. Of his father's hand, steady on his shoulder decades ago. "You don't have to raise your voice, son. Just don't lower yourself." When he opened his eyes again, the cabin was still watching him. Not with curiosity now, with recognition. The plane flew on, descending steadily, and somewhere below, a $500 million decision waited to be made official. The descent began without ceremony. A gentle tilt, a subtle pressure in the ears, the kind of movement most passengers barely noticed, but everyone on this flight felt. Arthur Coleman sensed it in his chest before the captain announced it. The quiet shift from suspended time to consequence. The cabin tightened. Tray tables rattled softly as they were secured. Window shades clicked open. Outside, the gray sprawl of the East Coast emerged beneath a blanket of cloud. Roads like veins, buildings small and distant. Melissa Grant stood near the forward galley, hands clasped, posture rigid. She had stopped checking her phone. Every message now felt like a countdown. Human resources, operations, a supervisor she had never met but already feared. She replayed the moment again. The choice, the words, the ease with which she had decided someone else could absorb the cost of keeping things smooth. She had been wrong. In first class, the man stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched near his temple. His phone buzzed twice. He ignored it. The notifications stacked silently on the screen. He had never been the kind of man who liked surprises. He built his life on predictability, on knowing which doors opened when he pushed. This door had closed. The veteran shifted in his seat, hands folded now, gaze forward. He had nothing left to say. He had learned long ago that some fights were won simply by refusing to sit down when asked. Eleanor watched the aisle like a witness at the end of a trial. Her phone was tucked away, but her memory was sharp. She would remember this, every face, every silence. Arthur sat with his eyes open, fixed on nothing in particular. He felt the descent as a slow tightening, like the final turn of a screw. His phone rested on the tray table, face down. He did not need to look at it to know what was happening beyond the cabin walls. Susan was efficient, always had been. She would have called the board chair by now, not with outrage, with questions.
She would have used words like alignment and exposure and long-term risk. She would have framed the decision not as punishment, but as inevitability. Arthur trusted her judgment. He had built an empire on it. The intercom chimed. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing," Captain Reeves said. Melissa inhaled sharply and moved down the aisle, checking seatbelts, collecting stray cups. When she reached Arthur, she paused. "Sir," she said quietly, "when we land, there will be people waiting." Arthur looked up. "I assumed there would be." She hesitated. "I want to say this before that happens." He waited. "I didn't see you," she said. "Not really. I saw a problem I could move out of the way." Arthur considered her words, the honesty in them, the cost. "That's how systems survive," he said, "by making people invisible." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded once. "I won't forget this." "Good," Arthur said. "Neither will I." She moved on. The man in first class finally looked back at Arthur again. There was something different in his eyes now. Calculation. Fear. Recognition that whatever story he had told himself about who mattered was unraveling. "You think you're teaching a lesson," he said quietly, leaning across the aisle. "But all you're doing is making enemies." Arthur met his gaze without flinching. "No," he said. "I'm revealing priorities." The man scoffed weakly. "You'll regret this." Arthur tilted his head slightly. "I've regretted silence far more." The engines lowered in pitch. The ground drew closer. The plane banked gently to the right. Phones buzzed again, more frequently now. Several passengers glanced down despite themselves. A few gasps. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind Arthur. Eleanor whispered, "It's already out there." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment. Not to escape, to center. He remembered a different descent. Years ago, a private jet. A different kind of tension. A different decision that had reshaped an industry. He had been younger then, angrier, more eager to prove something. This time felt different. He wasn't proving anything. He was refusing something. The wheels hit the runway with a firm jolt. The cabin rocked once, then steadied. Applause scattered weakly, then died. No one felt like celebrating. As the plane slowed, Arthur opened his eyes. Through the window, he saw flashing lights in the distance. Not emergency. Media. The unmistakable cluster of vehicles waiting where they shouldn't have been yet. Melissa saw them too. Her breath caught. The man in first class froze. "What is that?" he asked, voice tight. No one answered him. The plane taxied slowly toward the gate. Every second stretched. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Reeves said, his voice careful now. "Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." Arthur felt the vibration of his phone before it lit up. He turned it over. Susan Miller. One line. Board notified. Deal frozen. Press is asking for confirmation. Arthur typed back with measured precision. "They'll get it when I step off the plane." He slid the phone back onto the tray table. Around him, the cabin held its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. The plane came to a stop. The seatbelt sign remained on. Outside, shapes gathered. Cameras, microphones, figures moving with purpose. Arthur stayed seated. This was the moment people often misunderstood. They expected triumph, a speech, a declaration. What they didn't understand was that power, real power, waited. It did not rush the ending. It let the truth arrive on its own. And when the seatbelt sign finally clicked off, The sound echoed louder than any applause. Arthur Coleman rose. The aisle opened in front of Arthur Coleman like a corridor into judgment. He did not move immediately. Neither did anyone else. The red light above flickered once, then steadied. The signal had changed, but the moment had not yet caught up. Captain Reeves stood near the cockpit door now, hands clasped behind his back. He met Arthur's eyes and nodded. Not as a superior, as a witness. Arthur stepped forward. The cabin parted instinctively. People pressed into their seats, not out of fear, but out of respect for the gravity moving past them. Eleanor stood as he passed, placing a hand over her heart. The veteran rose as well, straight-backed, silent, offering something between a salute and an apology for a lifetime of watching. Arthur acknowledged them with a glance. No smile, no pause. In first class, the man remained seated. His face had gone pale, the color draining as the reality outside the windows finally registered. Through the glass, the terminal corridor was packed. Camera lights glinted. Security uniforms moved with purpose. This was not routine. This was consequence. He swallowed hard. Arthur stopped beside his seat. For a moment, neither spoke. The man cleared his throat. "You didn't have to take it this far." Arthur looked at him then. Really looked. Not at the watch, not at the tailored suit, at the eyes. The uncertainty there. The dawning understanding that the world did not revolve around his preferences. "I didn't take it anywhere," Arthur said quietly. "I just didn't stop it." The man shook his head, a nervous, disbelieving motion. "You think this makes you right?" Arthur's voice was calm. "No, it makes you visible." The man opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say that would not sound small. Arthur moved on. Melissa Grant stood near the galley, eyes glassy, face set. She straightened as Arthur approached, bracing for something she knew she deserved but could not predict. "Mr. Coleman," she said. Arthur paused. "I know what happens next," she continued. "For me." Arthur studied her. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with resolve. "What happens next," Arthur said, "depends on what you do after today." She nodded slowly. "I intend to remember." "That will matter," Arthur said. She watched him go, a weight lifting, even as another settled in its place. The jet bridge connected with a dull thud. The door opened. Sound rushed in first. Shutter clicks, voices overlapping. The low roar of attention that only came when a story had already escaped containment. Security formed a narrow passage. Reporters pressed forward, microphones extended, questions colliding mid-air. Arthur stepped into it. "Mr. Coleman, is it true you were removed from first class? Are you canceling the acquisition? Did the airline discriminate against you? Is this retaliation?" Arthur raised one hand. The noise did not stop immediately. It took a moment for people to realize the gesture was not performative. It was final. The crowd stilled. Arthur's voice carried without strain. "This isn't about a seat," he said. "It's about a decision." Cameras leaned closer. Pens froze above notepads. "On this flight," Arthur continued, "a valid ticket was treated as optional. Dignity was weighed against convenience, and convenience won." He paused, let the words settle. "That decision wasn't made by one person," he said. "It was made by a system that believed no one important was watching." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I was watching," Arthur said. "So were you." He did not mention money. Not yet. Inside the plane, the man in first class listened from his seat, heart pounding. Every word felt like a tightening noose. He glanced around, suddenly aware of how alone he was. No nods, no quiet allies, just eyes that now saw him clearly. Arthur continued down the jet bridge. "Will you confirm the deal is canceled?" someone shouted. Arthur stopped, turned. "The transaction has been suspended," he said, "pending a full review of company culture, training, and accountability." Suspended. The word hit harder than canceled. It implied scrutiny, exposure, time. A reporter pressed forward. "Isn't this an overreaction?" Arthur met her gaze. "Overreaction is pretending harm doesn't count unless it's loud," he said. This wasn't loud. It was routine. Silence followed. Inside the cabin, the man finally stood, legs unsteady. He gathered his things quickly, hands clumsy now. He avoided looking at anyone as he moved toward the exit, shrinking under the weight of a story he could no longer control. Eleanor watched him pass. She said nothing. The veteran didn't either. Outside, the terminal buzzed with activity. Security moved Arthur toward a quieter area, but he slowed, allowing the moment to breathe. "My firm invests in infrastructure," Arthur said to the cluster of cameras that had followed. "We build systems meant to last. Systems that carry people." He paused, his voice lowered slightly. "I don't invest in systems that ask some people to step aside so others can be comfortable." A question cut through the crowd. "Is this about race?" Arthur nodded once. "It's about judgment. Race just made it visible." The doors to the terminal closed behind him. The story was no longer confined to a cabin at altitude. It was airborne.
And somewhere in offices across the country, screens refreshed, calls were placed, and a $500 million assumption began to collapse under the weight of a single decision made too casually to defend. Arthur Coleman walked forward, unhurried. The flight was over. The reckoning had just begun. The terminal smelled like coffee and disinfectant, a familiar mix that usually meant arrivals and reunions. Today it felt sterile, exposed. Arthur Coleman was led past a glass wall into a quieter corridor where the noise thinned but did not disappear. Voices still echoed through the ceiling vents. The story was already moving faster than footsteps. Susan Miller was waiting. She stood near a column, phone pressed to her ear, jacket folded over her arm. 58. Precise. Composed in a way that suggested she had been bracing for this call long before it came. When she saw Arthur, she ended the call without a word and walked toward him. "They're scrambling," she said softly. "Board members. Legal." Everyone wants to be first to sound reasonable. Arthur nodded. Reasonable usually arrives late. "They're asking if there's a path back," Susan continued. "A statement, a meeting, a pause framed as partnership." Arthur stopped walking. He turned to face her fully now, the glass wall reflecting both of them. Two people who had built something together over decades, brick by brick, decision by decision. "What did you see?" Arthur asked. Susan didn't hesitate. "A system that chose ease over equity. Again." Arthur exhaled. "Then they already have their answer." She nodded. "I'll relay it." As she stepped away, Arthur watched the reflection of travelers passing behind him. Faces blurred, rolling bags, lives moving forward untouched by what had just happened. He understood that too. Most things that mattered didn't interrupt the day. They reshaped it, quietly. Down the corridor, Melissa Grant stood alone near a service door, shoulders hunched, uniform still immaculate, but now meaningless. She had been told to wait. She had been waiting her entire career. Arthur approached. She looked up quickly, eyes rimmed red but dry, They told me to stay here.
Arthur nodded. That makes sense.
I'm not asking for anything, she said, words tumbling out faster than she intended. I just wanted to tell you, I grew up watching my father get treated like that. In stores, at work. I promised myself I'd never be the person who did it to someone else.
She laughed weakly.
Turns out promises don't mean much if you're afraid.
Arthur studied her face. The shame, the clarity, the cost. Fear doesn't make you evil, he said. It makes you predictable. She flinched, then nodded.
What do I do now?
Arthur considered the question. He did not answer it lightly. You decide whether today is an exception, he said, or a turning point. Melissa swallowed.
And if it costs me my job?
Arthur met her eyes. Then it costs you your job. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had settled.
Thank you,
she said. Not for mercy. For honesty. Arthur turned away. Across the terminal, a commotion built near the baggage claim. The man from first class stood at the center of it, voice raised, face flushed, arguing with a security supervisor who remained unmoved. His status meant nothing here. His words slid off policy like rain. Arthur watched for a moment, not with satisfaction, with recognition. This was what it felt like when the floor shifted and you realized it had never been solid. Susan returned, phone in hand.
The airline has issued a preliminary statement.
Arthur raised an eyebrow.
Non-admission, she said. Language about misunderstanding. A commitment to review procedures.
Arthur nodded. They're still speaking to themselves. They want you to respond. Arthur glanced around the terminal, at the woman hugging her husband near the exit, at the child tugging a suitcase too large for his frame, at the ordinary humanity of a place designed to move people without seeing them. I will, he said. Once. Susan's phone buzzed again. She silenced it.
Arthur,
she said carefully.
There's another thing.
He waited.
The market reacted faster than expected. Transportation sector took a hit. Analysts are already attributing it to governance risk.
Arthur absorbed that, not as a victory, as a confirmation. Good, he said. They're learning the right lesson. Outside, rain had begun to fall. A thin, steady drizzle that turned the pavement dark and reflective. Arthur stepped toward the exit, security trailing at a respectful distance. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in. Cameras surged forward again, but this time there was less chaos, more focus. The questions had sharpened. Mr. Coleman, a reporter called. Is this personal? Arthur stopped under the awning, rain tapping softly above him. No, he said. It's structural. Another voice. Are you punishing the airline? Arthur shook his head. I'm declining to reward it. Will you ever work with them again? Arthur considered the rain, the city beyond, the people who would read the headlines and argue about intent instead of impact. Change isn't something you negotiate after the fact, he said. It's something you build before anyone's watching. A pause followed. Pens scratched. Cameras hummed. Last question, someone shouted. Do you think this will actually change anything? Arthur looked at the reporter. Young, earnest, tired. It already has, he said. For everyone who saw what happened and recognized it. For everyone who didn't. He stepped into the waiting car. The door closed, muting the noise. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and rain. Arthur leaned back, finally allowing the tension to ease from his shoulders. Not relief, resolution. Susan slid into the seat across from him. Where to? Arthur looked out the window as the car pulled away from the terminal. The rain streaked downward, blurring lights into lines. "Home," he said. The city unfolded around them, indifferent and alive. Somewhere, boardrooms were filling, policies were being drafted, careers were tilting on new axes. Arthur closed his eyes. He did not think about the money, or the headlines, or the man who had demanded space without earning it. He thought about a question he had asked years ago and never fully answered. What does it cost to look away? Today, he had chosen not to, and that choice, once made, could not be undone. The hearing room was smaller than Arthur had expected. Not grand, not theatrical, just wood paneling, long tables, microphones that picked up every breath. The kind of room where decisions were made quietly and then lived with loudly. Arthur sat alone at the witness table. No entourage. No lawyers flanking him. Just a glass of water, untouched, and a nameplate that read, Arthur Coleman, Managing Partner. The letters were plain, deliberate. Behind him, the room filled slowly. Reporters, advocacy groups, airline executives who avoided eye contact, a few former employees who did not. The murmur rose and fell like a tide. At the center dais, Senator William Harper adjusted his glasses. 71, former pilot, a man who still carried himself like he believed procedure mattered. "This hearing will come to order," Harper said. The room settled. "Mr. Coleman," the senator continued, "you're not here because you were denied a seat. You're here because what happened afterward exposed something larger. I'd like you to explain, in your own words, why you took the action you did." Arthur leaned forward slightly. The microphone caught the quiet shift of his weight. "I didn't take action," he said calmly. "I declined to ignore a pattern." Harper nodded. "Go on." Arthur looked around the room. He did not search for allies. He spoke as if the truth did not require them. "I've spent my career evaluating risk," he said. "Operational risk, financial risk, reputational risk. What happened on that flight wasn't a mistake. It was a decision made under pressure that revealed the values beneath the policy." A murmur rippled through the audience. "When organizations reward compliance over judgment," Arthur continued, "they don't get better service. They get predictable failure. And when those failures harm people, the cost doesn't show up immediately. It accumulates." Senator Harper folded his hands. "Some would argue you reacted disproportionately." Arthur's eyes lifted, steady. "Disproportion assumes the harm was small." A pause. "Tell me," Arthur said gently, "what is the appropriate response to discovering that dignity is conditional in a system you were about to own?" No one answered. Harper did not press. Another senator leaned forward. "You could have handled this privately." Arthur nodded, and ensured nothing changed. That landed harder than any raised voice. In the back row, Melissa Grant watched, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had not been asked to testify. Not yet. But she had insisted on being present. She needed to hear it said out loud. Needed to see where the responsibility truly lay. Arthur's words did not accuse her. That was the hardest part. After the hearing recessed, the room emptied in fragments. Conversations hushed. Phones lit up. The story would be shaped again before nightfall. Arthur stood, collected his jacket, and stepped into the hallway. Melissa waited there. "I didn't know if you'd want to speak to me," she said quietly. Arthur regarded her for a moment. She looked different than she had on the flight, less armored, more present. "I don't avoid conversations," he said. She nodded. "I've resigned." Arthur absorbed that.
You didn't have to. I did, she replied.
If I stayed, I'd spend every day explaining instead of fixing. He studied her face. The resolve was real.
What comes next? Arthur asked.
I don't know, she said. But I know what doesn't. A faint smile crossed his face.
That's usually enough to start.
She hesitated. I'm not asking for forgiveness.
Arthur met her eyes. Good. Forgiveness is cheap. Change is not. She let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. Across the hall, Senator Harper approached, jacket draped over his arm. Mr. Coleman, he said, you realize this won't end here. Arthur inclined his head. I hope not. Harper studied him. You could have walked away. Many would have. Arthur considered that. I did walk away, he said, from ownership, not from responsibility. Harper extended his hand. That distinction matters. Arthur shook it. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps. The press waited, but there was less frenzy now, more listening. Arthur gave a brief statement. No slogans. No grand claims, just clarity. This was never about a seat, he said. It was about what happens when systems forget the people inside them. If this moment leads to better training, better judgment, and fewer silent compromises, then it was worth the discomfort. A reporter called out, "Do you consider this justice?" Arthur paused. Justice is ongoing, he said. This was accountability. That evening, Arthur sat alone in his study, the house quiet except for the tick of an old clock on the mantel. He loosened his tie, poured a small glass of bourbon, and stared out the window at the darkened yard. The day replayed itself in fragments. The hearing, Melissa's face, the weight of speaking plainly in rooms that preferred euphemism. His phone buzzed, a message from his daughter. I watched the hearing. I'm proud of you. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. The cost he had been carrying shifted just slightly. He typed back, Pride isn't the point, but I'm glad you saw it. Another message followed. Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? Arthur thought about the question longer than he expected. He typed slowly. I wish it didn't need to happen. That's different. He set the phone down and took a sip of bourbon. It burned gently, grounding him. Somewhere, policies were being rewritten, training manuals revised, not because of him alone, but because a moment had forced clarity. Arthur stood and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow would bring new interpretations, new arguments, new resistance. But tonight, there was something else. A sense that a line had been drawn, not dramatically, not loudly, but firmly. And once drawn, it had changed the shape of the ground beneath it. That, Arthur knew, was how real change began. The airport looked ordinary again. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, the quiet choreography of travelers moving on habit rather than hope. 5 years had passed, yet Arthur noticed the details more now. The way people were greeted, the way voices lowered or lifted depending on who stood in front of the counter. He walked slower than he used to, not from age, but from intention. At the gate, a young attendant stood upright, hands folded, eyes steady. She greeted each passenger the same way. Clear voice, direct eye contact. No scanning clothes, no weighing worth. Arthur paused just long enough to see it wasn't performative. It was learned, trained, chosen. He took his seat without ceremony. The cabin filled. A veteran with a service cap nodded at him. A grandmother helped her husband buckle in.
A tired man in work boots closed his eyes before takeoff. No one stared. No one whispered. That, more than applause or headlines, felt like progress. When the plane pushed back, Arthur rested his hands on the armrests.
He thought of the meeting rooms he no longer entered, the deal he had walked away from, the years he had spent believing leverage was measured only in numbers. He knew better now. Real leverage lived in moments when silence would have been easier. The aircraft lifted smoothly. Outside the window, the city thinned into lines of light and then into darkness. Arthur did not feel triumphant. He felt settled. Later, midway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Calm, professional. No announcement about passengers of note, just weather, altitude, time. Exactly how it should be. Arthur smiled faintly. When they landed, there were no cameras waiting, no reporters, no raised voices. Passengers stood, gathered their bags, thanked the crew. Ordinary courtesy, practiced without thought. The kind that only becomes invisible when it is universal. At the jet bridge, the same young attendant met him again. She met everyone again. "Have a good evening, sir," she said. Arthur nodded. "You too." Outside, the night air was cool. He paused before heading toward baggage claim, letting the moment settle. He thought of the cost. The deals lost. The relationships strained. He thought of the quieter returns. Policies rewritten. Training sessions that no longer skipped the hard parts. People who now hesitated before choosing convenience over fairness. Change had not arrived with fireworks. It arrived with repetition. Arthur adjusted his coat and walked on. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that dignity is built choice by choice, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments by writing 3 words: dignity over comfort.